Hello and welcome. The one big question in people's mind at this time is about the nature and the quality of India's economic recovery in the new fiscal year, especially given the fact that COVID cases are now spiking all across the country. How will this year play out economically for India in a global context? For perspective, we're joined on the Newstrack at this time, live and exclusive, by the Chief Economist of the International Monetary Fund, Dr. Gita Gopinath. Dr. Gopinath, welcome to India Today. You've just put out the latest round of IMF projections, which have the Indian economy growing at 12.5% in 2021. Can you explain to our viewers at the outset how you arrived at this number? What gives you the confidence that India will be the fastest growing emerging economy in the world?
Hi, Rahul. As always, a pleasure to join you. So we have a small upgrade for 2021. We had 11.5% before, now it's 12.5%. The reason for that was the continued increase in economic activity, the normalization, the recovery that we were seeing in terms of high-frequency indicators. That was one part of it. The other part was the February budget, which added about 0.2 percentage points to our growth forecast. So again, India gets to 12.5% growth in 2021 fiscal year. But again, we have to keep in mind that it's coming off a very large contraction of minus 8%. But again, just to keep in mind that we locked in these numbers on around March 5th. This is before we've seen these record numbers in terms of the second wave in India. We assumed that there would be localized lockdowns, just because until you get to widespread vaccinations, things will not get back to perfectly normal. We expected that would be the case. And now, if, on the other hand, there is any kind of a much more widespread nationwide lockdown, then that would be a downside risk to our forecast.
Because one of the big challenges of coming up with projections at a time when there are so many unknowns is about how the COVID situation plays itself out. We're already seeing in automotive manufacturing hubs like Pune, there are far more restrictions than there were earlier. How could this potentially impact your headline projection of 12.5% growth? And what would you be looking out for when it comes to the second wave and the impact it can have on India's growth projections?
So in our 12.5% projection, we had assumed that there would be continued localized lockdowns. Again, another important factor to keep in mind is the connection between the virus, lockdowns, and economic activity. What we have seen around the world, and this is true in India too, is that the sensitivity of economic activity to these kinds of containment measures came down some. So again, it's still early days, but to be clear, a 12.5% growth is conservative given a contraction of 8% in 2020. So in terms of sequential growth, quarter-on-quarter growth, it is quite conservative.
How do you assess the nature and the quality of India's economic recovery in a global context? Because you're not just looking at the India story, you're looking at India relative to what's happening in other emerging economies and in a global context. How do you assess how India is doing vis-a-vis how other countries are doing?
Well, the good news is that India has returned to positive year-on-year growth. So it came down from the depth of its recession, and year-on-year had slight positive growth in the fourth quarter of last year. The point, of course, is that there is still a challenge in terms of covering the gap relative to where India would have been in the absence of the pandemic. So Rahul, just in terms of a number, if you look at the years of 2020 to 2022, over the 3-year period, on average, India's hit to per capita income is around 9%, relative to what it would have been in the absence of the pandemic. And for the emerging market and developing economies as a whole, that number is 5%. For advanced economies, that number is 3%. So again, good news in terms of positive year-on-year growth, things are recovering. But again, virus poses a downside risk, and still there is a distance to go in terms of still catching up.